So I might start again. I'm sorry for that one. So just briefly, welcome today to our Mainstream Bio webinar series on the episode 4, Empowering Consumers in the Bioeconomy, Sustainable Choices for Health, Wellness, and the Future Generation. I would like to just use this opportunity to thank you all of you for joining us today and for your continued support during this webinar series. We are really grateful that you join us and that you have been with us through the round 1 and through the round 2. My name is Dragica Grozdanic, and I'm working as a bioeconomy researcher within the Munster Technological University, and I'm going to be your moderator today. As you can see on your right-hand side corner, there is a QR code, which is bringing you straight to our official Mainstream Bio website page, where you can find more information about our project itself, what we gained so far about our Mainstream Bio toolbox, and also about our upcoming events. Just one note that today's webinar is going to be recorded. Just if you don't mind, can just somebody confirm with me that the recording is on?
Yeah.
Yes, it's on there.
Thank you so much. Okay, so it's going to be recorded for the educational purposes. Now let's look into our today's agenda. So we will start with introduction to the webinar 4, which is going to be presented to you by myself. Then we will dive into the case study on the plant-based and GM biofortified foods, which is going to be presented to you by Professor Hans de Steur. Then we will look into the consumer perspective and acceptance towards bio-based products, which is going to be presented to you by Associate Professor Anna Rita Colasante. Then we will look into the importance of educating consumers to make healthier food choices and to reduce the food waste, which is going to be presented to you by my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Attert. Then we will dive into the panel discussion with our guest Professor Pier Giuseppe Morone. Then we will dive into the interactive Q&A session where I am inviting all of you to actively participate in. And then we are planning to finalize webinar somewhere around 12:15. During the whole webinar today, feel free to drop the questions into the chat, and then once we come to interactive Q&A session, your questions are going to be addressed to the relevant speaker. Also, feel free to share maybe your thoughts with us, because they are also valuable to us. Then something about the webinar series schedule so far. So we have conducted webinar 1, webinar 2, and webinar 3. And today we are on our final webinar 4, Empowering Consumers in the Bioeconomy, Sustainable Choices for Health, Wellness, and the Future Generations. As I have mentioned earlier, our webinars are recorded for the educational purposes. So feel free to rewatch them at your most convenient time, or just simply share them with your friends, colleagues, or whomever you think that these webinars are beneficial to. You can find all of these webinars on our official Mainstream Bio YouTube channel, which you can access through this QR code in your right-hand side corner, or simply you can go on our Mainstream Bio Toolbox site and you can find those webinars there as well. Now let's dive into today's topic. So what is driving the shift towards the bio-based economy? For sure, the key drivers of the change are consumers. Even with the small eco-friendly choices like sustainable packing contributes to the circular economy. Already 4 years ago, some highlights, what I would like to share with you, that even during that time already was awareness which drives adoption. There is 92% of the Irish and 89% of the Dutch consumers already supported the bio-based products. In relation to that, even the Gen Z and millennials, so 75% of them already are willing to change the habits for sustainability. So what's the call to action? Let's further educate, engage, and empower consumers to make informed choices for a healthier and sustainable planet. Why? Because your choice matters. So in relation to that, what are the objectives of today's webinar? So the objectives of today's webinar is empowering consumers in the bioeconomy by showcasing how everyday choices in the food, energy, and the personal care contribute to sustainability and emphasizing the role of ethical sourcing, eco-friendly products, and the circular economy principles. Then enhancing consumers' awareness and the trust by exploring consumer attitudes towards the bio-based products, addressing the key concerns such as the cost and sustainability, and presenting the real-world case studies that illustrate approaches for increasing the engagement and acceptance. Also, we will be looking into promoting healthier food choices and waste reduction by highlighting initiatives that educate consumers on sustainable food habits, offering practical tools for better food planning and storage, and emphasizing community-driven solutions to minimizing the waste. Then also we will look in advancing sustainable nutrition through innovation by showcasing the role of plant-based and GM biofortified foods in improving the health and sustainability, analyzing consumer perception and adoption challenges, and discussing the future opportunities in shaping the food landscape. Before we proceed to our first presentation today, I would like to take this moment to ask you all to please refill our questionnaire at the end of the webinar, because your feedback is really valuable and important, not only to us, but also to the future projects and campaigns. So thank you all of you for that. You can do that in two ways, by scanning this QR code on your screen, or just by clicking the link, which I'm going to share with you shortly in the chat, and just refill it at your best time. So thank you so much for that one. Now, let's dive into our first topic today, on the case study on the plant-based and GM biofortified foods. I will stop sharing my screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, I see you here, Hans. So to begin, we have with us Professor Hans de Steur from Ghent University, who is a professor in quantitative research methods in social economics at the Ghent University Division of Agri-Food Marketing and the Chain Management, Department of Agriculture Economics. He holds a master's degree in sociology and in economics and business administration. He also earned his PhD in 2021 with dissertation on the market potential of biofortification. His research focus on agri-food marketing and social economic analysis, emphasis consumer and stakeholder behavior, as well as a market analysis of innovation and technology. Professor de Steur has contributed to numerous publications and projects with thematic expertise in areas such as genetically modified foods, biofortification, and plant-based foods. So Hans, the floor is yours. I hope you can share your screen with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for that nice and long introduction of myself. Let me share my presentation. Do you see it full screen or not?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Let me do it like that. Okay, let me start. I have about 15 minutes for two case studies, so I was wondering what I was thinking when I was developing the slideshow. But nevertheless, I hope at least one of those case studies might be into your interest. So it deals with sustainable and healthy consumers, using the case of plant-based foods. I think some others might also touch upon that case, and biofortified foods, and especially GM biofortified foods. And what I will do is I will just quickly present some findings related to some research I and colleagues have done related to those two case studies. Before I start, just quickly regarding the first case, so genetically modified biofortified foods. What are we talking about here? Not sure if everybody is aware of these concepts, but here we're talking about biofortification, which is kind of increasing the micronutrients content concentration in basically staple foods, So micronutrient contents meaning minerals and vitamins, in order to tackle indeed micronutrient deficiencies and the burden of different disease. The specific case study focuses on GM biofortified foods. You could also biofortified crops by crossbreeding, in a conventional way. Here we're using GM technology to increase basically vitamin or mineral or a combination levels in staples like rice, maize, and so forth, sweet potatoes, and so on. So quite a, a health component, but also a controversial product, which makes it interesting for me for doing consumer research. Just to give you an idea, this is golden rice, at least the one on the left side, obviously. So yellowish vitamin A enriched rice, that is GM rice. So it's biofortified using biotechnology. Because there's no vitamin A in rice, we're using GM technology to increase or at least introduce and increase vitamin A levels. So that's one of the key flagships of GM biofortified crops. It's already ready since the turn of the century, but it's still not there due to all the controversy and the negative campaigning against this type of genetic modification. Nevertheless, it might be approved in the near future. So I think in a couple of years we will hear a lot more about GM biofortified crops. So genetic modification to help the consumer basically, and not so much the farmer. What I will do in the next slides, this is just an example. I did research on different of these different applications. What I will now do is I will show some findings, and I will always relate it to a power. So the first one is the power of knowledge. In research in this field, in consumer research related to this topic, we kind of found that knowledge is really a key driver to acceptance of those products. We also see there are knowledge issues, as you see in the case of Bangladesh. This is a consumer study where people incorrectly stated that golden rice is available in Bangladesh, while golden rice is not available anywhere in the world. So we see that there's clear knowledge gaps regarding what is GM and also the implementation of those crops. Nevertheless, I call it the power of knowledge to drive people towards consuming such crops with a health and a bit controversial attribute. But nevertheless, knowledge, this is a study we have done on what influences consumers and farmers, a systematic review. So kind of behavioral drivers and cognitive drivers. And we see that knowledge is indeed important, but it's not the only driver, obviously, to stimulate people towards the right decisions. Let's move to the next power, the power of the benefits, communicating the right benefits. That's something we have seen in the reviews and studies we have done on willingness to pay for GM foods. So how much are people willing to pay for GM foods? Where we see that if the GM foods are oriented towards increasing farmer benefits, increased yields, and so forth, people tend to be willing to consume it if they receive a discount for it. While on the other hand, in our case, when we're dealing with consumer traits, we call it, so the benefits really are oriented towards consumers, increased health in this case for the biofortification, we see that people tend to be willing to pay for those foods and be willing to pay more for those foods. So they're willing to pay premiums for such foods, despite the fact that they're based on a technology that is still controversial and has there's quite some discussion and debate about it. This is a review we have done, not to discuss it too much, but a review we have done on different products everywhere in the world, where we indeed see that if you have a GM food that has a consumer benefit and especially a health benefit, that people are inclined to make a trade-off in favor of that product. They're willing to pay more for it, up to 40-60% more in terms of price premium. So that's the power of the right benefits, let's say, and communicating that. We also see that regardless of the technology, so whether it's based on GM technology or conventional breeding, we see that people are willing to pay for foods, biofortified foods, so foods with an increased micronutrient level. Another power is the power of information, where we see that, okay, on average, we did a meta-analysis, we see that consumers on average are willing to pay 24% more for such GM foods with a health benefit, let's say. But what happens if information is provided? So we did some experiments. We also reviewed other experiments. And there we see, in a nutshell, if you look at the green bars, if you give positive information regarding the nutrition benefits, dark green, or the GM technology, so positive information, we see that on average, those willingness to pay levels increase. However, and that's important, also in reality, if conflicting information is there, both positive and negative information, or if people only receive negative information, we see that willingness to pay drastically reduces, even up to a level where they only want to pay for it if they get a discount compared to the regular product. So a huge power of information on consumers' acceptance and decisions, especially for not yet existing products. The power of marketing, also quite important. So I was focusing a bit on, hey, let's clearly communicate those product benefits, especially if they benefit the consumer. So tailor your communication towards those benefits. But a message also we found in research on these topics is go beyond the product benefits, especially the other marketing aspects are as and sometimes more important than the product benefits alone. What you see below, the framework is not so crucial, but we did a study on golden rice to see what other expectations regarding the marketing of golden rice, aside from the product aspects, is important. We see that also the way the price is being set, obviously, but also the way it is being distributed and the way we promote not only the product benefits, but also the price and the place and so forth, is also crucial and is also helping to drive consumers towards, in the future, then consuming golden rice in this case. This was a study in Bangladesh. I talked a lot about products and so forth and product benefits. Another paper we wrote, a bit summarizing the state of the art in this field, where we also kind of stimulate researchers and policymakers and so forth to also think from a dietary perspective. So not to try to do research and also communicate golden rice on its own, but as one case of GM biofortification, but try to stimulate the integration of golden rice in diets to ensure that people integrate it in their current way of consuming, rather than just shifting from rice to golden rice, integrating it in a golden diet, as we call it for this case. Okay, so that's the power of marketing. Not sure how I'm doing time-wise, but we'll move now to the second case study on the plant-based foods. So here we move more towards environmental sustainability and health as well. What I will show here in the next slides is a few slides linking again with powers as well that are at stake, based on the Smart Protein Project, a European project, where we collected in 2 waves data with consumers, as you see, in 10 European countries, with a balanced sample regarding gender and age and so forth. It was a consumer survey, 6,000 to 7,000 consumers. We measured different things, more than I can show here today, obviously. There's a link on this slide, as you see below, to find the right publications on all these other constructs, but I will mainly talk about the blue ones, the lifestyles, the intention to eat, and the barriers. First of all, few words about the consumption patterns we found in our waves, where we clearly see that the omnivores are still dominating at least our sample and still the reality as well. Non-omnivores, here we call it unconventional eaters, are on the rise, but if we leave out the flexitarians, it's a bit still a picture that needs to be increased heavily. We see that the ones who are changing their diets are mainly motivated by a combination of environmental concerns, health concerns, and ethical animal welfare concerns, and so forth. So not so surprisingly. Yeah, so left side is the first wave, right side is the second wave. So it's 2-year difference. We also see that was a European level. We also see that between countries there's quite some variation. Even though the omnivores are dominating, we see different pictures. Not always the same as we find in other studies for those countries, but at least we see that the balance is not kind of equal in different EU member states. So there's not one universal consumer, obviously, in Europe and not in member states, and even within member states, there's quite some variation. Here we call it mainstream, that's again omnivores, and the alternatives are then the non-omnivores. Let's hope we can change that terminology in the future. Let's move to the barriers. I think I have 3 barriers here, and then I'll leave it. So the first one is the power of the barriers. This is a study we have done digging into the barriers, what is preventing consumers to shift, basically. And we see the heat map on the right side, and basically each column is a dietary lifestyle, as you see all the way at the bottom. And the more purple, the more problematic the barrier is, the more important the barrier is. So we see across dietary lifestyles, from omnivores to non-omnivores, that price and availability is really key. So price is also what we expect. Availability also seems to be very important, regardless of price. And if we move to the omnivores, the real meat consumers, let's say, we see that taste is commonly stated as a key barrier, but also the lack of information. Links a bit with my previous message, being aware, like golden rice in Bangladesh, being aware of what it is and knowing why you should consume it and so forth. And we also see that family matters. Family or peers, peer pressure is maybe the wrong word, but at least influences of the family matters. And that's something we explored a bit further. What you see in this slide links a bit with the power of the household or the household dynamics, where we see that this is just the descriptives. So at the mainstream level, so omnivores are typically mainly represented in a pure household. So 62% of the omnivores are in a pure household, meaning everybody is an omnivore. There's also omnivores in a single household, obviously, and also omnivores, less, 15% in a mixed household. If we look at alternatives in our sample, so the non-omnivores in our big samples, we see that it's a more balanced picture. So non-omnivores are kind of equally represented in a pure non-omnivore household as well as in a mixed household. And if we look at the influence of that composition, this slide will help, and also the paper if you want to learn more about it, where we showed that both for non-omnivores on the left side as well as omnivores on the right side, so for both of them, we see that if they are part of a diverse household, which means a household where there is a mix of omnivores and non-omnivores, we see that the intention to consume and also purchase plant-based foods in the future is significantly and much higher than in other cases. Okay, so we kind of have indications that being in a diverse household kind of can help to stimulate omnivores to consume more plant-based foods. So it's kind of a power of the household rather than the individual, what we tend to focus on a lot. All right, the power of the identity, that's the last one. And I think I'm also kind of out of time, more or less. So this is also an interesting one. I showed earlier that omnivores are still the majority in Europe, and then there's a growing group of non-omnivores and a lot of flexitarians. What you see here in this study, the link is there, or at least the paper is there, but on the figure as well, we see a comparison between flexitarians and omnivores. So flexitarians, those that are kind of stating that they are reducing their meat consumption, but they're still eating meat, but not as much as omnivores. At least that is what they say. If we look at this figure, and what you see in this figure is we see solid lines and dashed lines. So the solid lines represent both flexitarians and omnivores that eat high levels of plant-based foods. The dashed lines, that's also why there's this vertical red line, is both omnivores and flexitarians that eat less plant-based foods. But nevertheless, what is important is the comparison between the two solid lines as well as between the two dashed lines. Because what we see is that if we, for instance, look at the ones that don't consume a lot of plant-based foods, the solid lines, we see that both flexitarians and omnivores are kind of acting similar. And that's a bit also the main message we found in our paper. So in terms of consumption of meat products and so forth, they do not differ a lot. So people take an identity also in research and in surveys. They take an identity, they state they have a certain identity, but we see that a lot of flexitarians act similar as omnivores and vice versa. And even some flexitarians are eating much more meat than some of the omnivores. So this self-reported dietary lifestyles, which is a key concept in this field, has some challenges as well, especially if you hear that a lot of companies want to focus on flexitarians. It's quite important to take this into account. All right, wrapping up very quickly. So I used the case of biofortification with the use of GM technology, so increasing micronutrient levels in staple crops, showing the importance of knowledge, relative importance of knowledge, showing the importance of the right benefits that can lead to higher willingness to pay levels, the importance of information, and not only positive information, but the key influence of negative information, and as well the whole marketing idea we should take into account when we try to stimulate people to drive towards the right products. Then at plant-based food level, we show the power of barriers, the common ones, taste, price, and so forth, but also household dynamics that might be at stake, and also identities. We'll need to dig further into it, but we see that people identify themselves and probably not act in that way. So that's also important for those who want to have a tailored marketing strategy, for instance. In the future, and these are the last few words, in the future, and also that's studies we are currently conducting and also have conducted in the frame of the projects I presented. We don't look only at consumers, because if there's no farmers who want to grow protein-rich crops in Europe or grow these GM biofortified foods, then they will probably not be on the plates of the consumers. So it's always important to also take other stakeholders who basically are also consumers as well into account. And other research we do linked to this is also the sustainability assessments. It's one thing to show that plant-based foods are environmentally interesting, but it's another way to show that the farmers growing those crops will also do it in an economically viable way, that those products are also economically sustainable. So still a lot of work to do, but happy to hear your questions. And feel free to reach out to me. My email would be the easiest if you have questions or you want to seek for a discussion or a collaboration. Thank you so much.
Really, it's clear that biofortification and they have the form how we approach nutrition and sustainability. But I would just like to ask, just to use this opportunity, as I will not have you later on with us. Tell me, how do you see in the future, which of these two, let's say that people will be more kind, will they more kind of looking into the, this plant look into the, consuming the GM foods.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you still hear me because you freeze sometimes. So, but it's fine if I don't. Um, um, of course, it's yeah, the world differs if you look at different regions, right? So I think that the GM story is a bit a different story in Europe, as you know. Also the case of hidden hunger, because that's basically what biofortification tackles. So not the lack of quantities, but the lack of quality in food, meaning micronutrients, vitamin and mineral levels. So those crops are mainly focusing in regions where supplementation and dietary diversification, eating a lot of diverse micronutrient-rich foods like we do in Europe. So regions where that's not really working, then such crops can be interesting if the policy world also is in favor of GM technology. So I think that's what makes this two case studies interesting, because the first one is mainly focusing on let's say non-developed regions, and the plant-based foods is currently focusing a lot, and also that's where the money is right now. If you see a lot of research efforts in Europe, everybody is focusing on the protein shift because the money is there and because the policy also stimulates it. So I would see that a bit separately in terms of what we should focus on. Although I see also a trend towards plant-based foods now in Africa and so on, but it goes very slowly. But there is also a growing interest that eventually will also reach over there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Hans, for sharing all of this with us today. And thank you as well for joining us. Now, I would like to invite our second speaker, Associate Professor Anna Rita Colasante from, I hope that's going to be nicely pronounced, Unitelma Sapienza, University of Rome. She's going to discuss how consumers perceive and accept the bio-based products. Just to briefly introduce you, Anna Rita, Anna Rita Colasante, as I mentioned, she's associate professor at Unitelma Sapienza, University of Rome. She's specializing in economic policy and sustainability. She is also a member of the Bioeconomy and Transition Research Group, contributing to research of circular bioeconomy and sustainable development. She has been also involved in various projects focusing on economic implications of the bio-based innovations and the policies promoting sustainable transition. I hope I have introduced you nicely. And yeah,
Yes,
dear
thank
Anna
you
Rita,
so much.
please take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for giving me the possibility to present the summary of some researches that we conducted in our group. So today I'm quickly going to go through the importance of behavioral analysis, because this presentation wants to highlight the importance to consider something that is beyond, for example, the prices or the quality of the product, but to analyze something related also to some psychological aspects. And then I will present you some interesting results, of course, in a nutshell. So if somebody is interested in knowing more, you can read our paper, or you can contact me to have further information. So the importance of behavioral analysis in this kind of choices is really, really important, because the sustainability transition requires really important shifts, and especially in consumer behavior. And we are perfectly aware that usually in economics, the decision-making process is based on some assumptions that sometimes avoid to consider psychological aspects like social influence. And we are perfectly aware about the importance of these kind of factors. So if we are able to integrate these behavioral insights also in policy design, we can foster the transition and obtain our goal as soon as possible, let's say. So the first result that I'm going to show is the result of an experiment in economics that is about consumer choices in the food sector. In these experiments, our objective was to assess the importance of putting salience on some aspects. And we decided to select two important scores. The first one is the Nutri-score, that is the synthesis, for example, is an indicator, specific indicators, that is useful to understand the impact of this product on your nutrition, on your health. And the second one is the eco score. And the eco score provides a sort of measure about the environmental impact of what you are buying. Why we decided to run these experiments? Because in Italy, for example, it's not that common to have these indicators. In our opinion, it's important to provide some hints and guide consumers to the best possible choice. And the synthesis of this experiment is that we provide 30 available products to people, and we ask them to pick 8 of these products. And after they finalize their choices, we provide them the average, either eco score or Nutri score, or in one case, we provide both scores. And giving the possibility to change the products in their basket to improve their score. So, for example, if I selected 8 products and my average Nutri score is D, for example, I have the possibility to change my products in order to get a B, for example. So, besides this choice, we also ask several questions, also to understand a bit the motivation of people to select some products or others. And here we are the confirmation that nutritional aspects is something important to stress, is an information that people want to know. And hence, this is why we are boosting for the adoption of this Nutri-score also in Italy. Indeed, if you can see in the table, we ask people to select some factors that they prioritize during grocery shoppings. And as you can expect, price was chosen by 81% of people, meaning that the price is still one of the most important indicators that people are looking at. And interestingly, if we ask to select just one, the most important factor that they consider in their shopping, the nutritional aspect will be the first one. So also surpassing the price. And this is a really, really nice result and important result. In a nutshell, what we found is that when we provide information about the environmental impacts, so the eco score, we got the majority of people that are willing to change the composition of their baskets. Whereas in the case in which we provide both indicators, we have the lowest rate of people that are willing to change their choices. So one could think that if I got the information about the Nutri-score in the eco score at the very beginning, it led me to select the best products, okay, in both terms. But this is not the case. Indeed, what we found that is an interesting result is that by providing both information, we are obtaining the so-called informational overload, meaning that they are not able to change the composition of their baskets, not because it's good, but because they don't understand how to change the products in order to maximize both scores. So, and this is another important result. The second paper, that I'm going to present in a nutshell, is referring to the energy consumption. As you know, the clean energy package talk about the renewable energy communities. So, in our opinion, renewable energy communities are really important to convince people to use renewable energy and hence to foster the shifting from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable green energy. In this paper, we explore, again, some behavioral aspects, and especially we focus on the so-called social capital. The social capital is a complex, let's say, definition. Here I put just a quick resume. This feature of social organizations such as networks, norms, and trust that facilitate action and cooperation for mutual benefit. So, by observing, by measuring the willingness to join this renewable energy community, what we found out is that the environmental concern, meaning that how much you care about the environment, how much you are worried about the environment, is the most important factor, as you can see here. And also, the environmental concerns of the relatives plays a significant role in shaping the willingness to join a renewable energy community. But the nicest result is about social trust. Social trust means the trust that we have among peers. Okay, so you could have the political trust, meaning the trust you have in politicians or in institutions more in general, and the social trust, meaning peer trust. In this case, this is one of the factors that could boost the probability to join a renewable energy community. Finally, I want to stress one important point, because sometimes we focus directly on sustainable purchasing, meaning directly to observing which kind of goods we are going to buy. But we forgot that sustainable firms, sustainable business need to be financed. Okay, so we can also decide how to invest our saving, and we can decide to allocate our saving in sustainable investments. The problem to convince people to invest in this kind of, for example, green bonds, is the problem related with both lower returns, because usually, for example, for green bonds, there is a literature showing that they yield a lower return with respect to the brown counterpart, and the problem related to greenwashing. So I'm not sure, since these kind of investment are, let's say, risky in the sense that I could provide money, but then the firm could decide to produce in a different manner, and I cannot have the direct control on this. So there is the problem well known of the greenwashing. Again, we run an experiment and we provide different certification about this green investment. And what we found out is that if we provide reliable information about this kind of investment, we are able to convince also the so-called risk-averse people, meaning those people that are really not willing to invest in something that is risky, especially in the case of greenwashing. So they are not happy to invest their money in something that are not sure. And this is really important results. So the importance of reliable certification, third-party certification. And related to green investment, we also analyze the role of the cognitive dissonance, so a psychological trait that refers to the discomfort that we have when somebody finds some information that contradicts their beliefs. Okay. Also, in this case, we asked people to select different investments, and what we found that the summaries in this picture is that higher return differences. Okay, these numbers are return differences between sustainable and non-sustainable investment lead to greater information avoidance, meaning that if I got an higher return, I'm in a sense willing to accept the cognitive dissonance, meaning that I'm not looking for further information to confirm or disconfirm what I'm thinking. So I'm going to the conclusion. I hope that I'm not running out of time. And the synthesis of my presentation that resume different studies that we conducted is that behavioral insights are really important. And this is why we are continuously investigating these aspects on consumer choices, especially consumer choices, and the importance of the information, providing information, but this information needs to be really reliable in order to increase also consumers' trust towards this kind of new products, bio-based products. Thanks for your attention.
I hope you can see me. Yeah, and hear me, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Anna-Rita, thank you so much for sharing these valuable insights with us. It's actually really interesting to see that how consumers trust in the bio-based products, and also how can we strengthen that through the education and, of course, transparency. So I will have a few questions for you later on in the interactive Q&A session. Thanks so much for that. And now I'm pleased to invite, thank you. Now I'm pleased to invite you to introduce actually my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Attard. Maybe just briefly about our Jennifer. She's a principal investigator in sustainable food system with the Circular Bioeconomy Research Group at MTU in Kerry. She leads projects like SFI Found That Thread project and the Horizon 2020 Agro-Bridges project with supporting the short food supply chains. Dr. Attard also has worked on initiatives like Food Clouds, Apple Cleaning Project, and the surplus food redistribution from Irish horticultural sector. Dr. Attard also lectures and supervises the students on the bio-based value chains as a part of the Irish first postgrad course in the bioeconomy. Dear Jenny, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Davi, and thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope you can see my screen already.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. So I'll get started. So I suppose as Davi was saying, I'm going to be talking about educating consumers for healthier food choices and kind of linking that to reducing food waste. As you might have noticed from Davi's introduction of me, my background is actually in kind of food waste and sustainable food systems and that kind of thing. So not particularly in healthy food, but I suppose I just wanted to explain the links between those two, because I think that's something that maybe isn't so obvious to a lot of people. We might think as food waste, as just kind of an environmental concern sometimes, and that they're completely separate. So I'll start on that kind of health aspect. So just as, very broadly kind of what healthy food looks like. So we imagine kind of healthy foods to be fresh food, seasonal food. So again, if we think about something that's healthy, we want it to be seasonal. Yes, we want it to be fresh. We don't want it to come from the other side of the world necessarily. Locally picked fresh food is going to be the most nutritious. Unprocessed and unpackaged food is very healthy as well. We know that processed food isn't very good for us. Processed food tends to have more preservatives in it, tends to have a higher sugar content. And packaged food, again, the plastics, BPA and so on, are things that aren't so good for our health. And again, packaged food is going to tend to have preservatives, whereas unpackaged food is likely, fresh off the farm or out of a fishery and not going to have any preservatives or less preservatives. And then another thing to talk about as well is organic food. I think I get as well at this point, it's probably, if you asked most people whether they would prefer to eat broccoli that was grown with herbicides and pesticides and fungicides, I'd say most people would prefer the healthier option of having something grown without all those chemicals in it. So those are kind of the healthy food aspects that I'll focus on today. And then I might talk about now sort of where those come from. So if we think about fresh seasonal food, that's obviously going to be local, something that comes from the other side of the world, from South America, for example. If we're based in Europe, that's that's not going to be local, that's not going to be fresh. So if we want something fresh, it has to come from a local source. Unprocessed and unpackaged food is going to come from a type of supply chain that has fewer middlemen. So if we're getting our food unprocessed, maybe directly from the farmer or the fisherman, and it doesn't have to go through a factory or through kind of processors and packagers and so on, then there's less people in the supply chain before it gets to us. So generally that unprocessed, unpackaged food comes from a shorter food supply chain. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail soon. And then organic food, of course, comes from organic farms and fisheries. So I suppose I'll just talk about the food waste aspect, I suppose, of organic farms first, and I'll touch on the rest later on. But just very briefly, I guess, organic food, well, I suppose the downsides of food waste include everything that, like, with the wasted resources of everything that goes into growing that food in the first place. So if food isn't grown organically and it's grown with these synthetic fertilizers and chemicals and so on, if we use all of that to grow the food and then we don't eat the food at the end of the day, that's a massive waste of all of those resources that went into those chemicals, not only to produce the chemicals, but themselves, which is a massive environmental burden, but also the pollution that results from using all of those chemicals. So again, if we were to eat from an organic system, we're avoiding all of that risk, all of that pollution, and all of that happening. So any food waste coming out of organic systems rather than non-organic systems actually has much less of a burden on the environment than non-organic systems. So that's kind of touching on that. I'll move on to food waste more specifically now. So this is the picture in Ireland at the moment. I suppose the statistics from the Environmental Protection Agency here. So some of these are estimates kind of, but you'll see the food waste that is coming from the different parts of the supply chains in Ireland. So primary food production, that's farms and fisheries, and then processing and manufacturing, retail distribution, restaurants and food service and households. You can see that around a third, almost a third of all of the food waste in Ireland actually comes from manufacturing and processing. So of course, if we think back to, again, that unprocessed, unpackaged food and so on, if we actually bought food that didn't have to go through that processing and packaging, and that was actually healthier for us as well, we would just automatically be saving a third of all of the food waste that we create. So you can see there how very, very strongly those two are linked, which is something that we wouldn't often know. But my research tends to focus on primary production, because I'm very, very interested, of course, in having those direct links between primary food producers and people. I think it's the most sustainable and the most healthy option. And very often a lot of the waste that happens here is due to issues, further down the line. And some of the research that we did a few years back shows this. So this was Ireland's first study on food loss and waste. So myself and my colleague, Dr. Tracy O'Connor, would have done this study. So this was, the first study on food loss and waste in primary production in Ireland. So these are the results that you can see here, where the bar charts show the tonnages of food waste coming out of each sector, whereas those points there show the percentage of food that doesn't leave the farm or the fishery. So animal husbandry is our main sector in Ireland. It's huge, but you can see it's very efficient. There's only 0.5% of the waste coming there from the waste from that sector over there happening. However, horticulture, despite it being a very, very, very small sector in Ireland, it's actually where most of the food waste is happening. So there's over 120,000 tonnes coming out of there. So 21% of all of the food on farms, on horticulture farms in Ireland, doesn't leave the farm, let alone how much gets wasted further down the supply chain in processing, manufacturing, and retail and distribution, and so on. Sometimes for some crops, there's almost 40% doesn't leave the farm, such as for broccoli and cauliflower. There's many reasons for that. So like I said, 21% there is wasted, and about 31%, so a third of all of that food waste, is wasted just because it's not saleable. So there's not actually any problems with the food itself. It's just that supermarkets, large retailers will have their specifications. So they'll want a broccoli head to be of a certain weight and a certain size. And if it isn't of that weight and size, they won't take it. They'll return it to the farmer, and the farmer has no market for it. There's other things that happen there. Sometimes, if retailers will put an offer on one crop, for example, they'll put an offer on their broccoli, their cauliflower might not sell as much, and they might just return that cauliflower back to the farmer. So you can see there's a lot of power in those contracts between the retailers and the farmers. So the retailers do have a lot of power in their contracts, and the farmers don't have much power at all. So they're kind of obliged to abide by whatever is in those contracts, which isn't great. So therefore, a lot of waste, instead of happening in the retail and distribution sector, it actually ends up happening on the farms, and the burden falls on the farmers. And the reason for this is because they don't have alternative markets. People are now so used to shopping from supermarkets that they won't go directly to the farmers. They won't go to the small local shops. It's not convenient enough. and therefore farmers have tuned their business to these contracts with the larger retailers instead. But this obviously causes a lot of problems. So one of the projects that we've done in the past to look at kind of looking at these alternative markets for food producers, so kind of building that bridge between farmers and fishers and kind of smaller food producers and people. It's called the AgroBridges project. So again, just to explain that, this is kind of the usual food supply chain that we have, where we have the primary food producer, so food will go from there. Say potatoes, for example, might go to some kind of processing factory to turn them into chips, and they'll be packaged into a bag and frozen, and then distributed anywhere locally or across the world. They'll go to retail centers, and then from there, or distribution centers, and then from there they'll go to food service or households. So that's a very, very long, sometimes international or often international supply chain. But what we prefer to see is kind of more local, short food supply chains where there is very few links, or as few links, maximum one link really is what we like to see. So maybe a small local shop in the meantime. And the local shops can be really useful to benefit kind of both the farmer and the consumer, and creating that ease of convenience to join the two. Yeah, so that's just a decision there where we have definitions, or where we have as few links as possible between the producer and the consumer. And these are just a few different business models. So you can see farm shops, for example, or roadside sales on farms. One of the very interesting ones is community supported agriculture, where you can actually support your farmer by removing the risk for them. So you might tell them in the beginning of the year that, look, I'm going to buy from you for the rest of the year, and that way they can plan their production. So they won't overproduce just because they're not going to know what market they're going to have for that year, but they'll produce exactly what they need. And if they do really well, you do really well. And if they don't, then you might get a bit less food. But then, you know, that's kind of, at least you're ensuring that you will have a supply of food and your farmers will stay in business, as opposed to them closing down, which is happening a lot at the moment. And there's off-farm direct sales as well, such as farmers markets, and the one intermediary, like I told you, which benefits everyone because the farmers won't have to create their own shops. And then also consumers can go to one place to get a lot of different foods. We did a consumer survey actually as part of this, and that's kind of, I suppose, some of the results might link in with what Anrita was saying previously. So in terms of consumer motivations, you can actually see here that people actually do shop from shorter food supply chains because they want that taste, that freshness, and that healthiness. So they know that local food is healthier for them. They know that there's less of a food safety risk with local food because it's fresher, as opposed to something that they maybe also don't trust. They don't know where it came from and who's produced it, and basically what's in it. However, there's also the barriers there. So you can see, like I was saying, because of like there's so many supermarkets and people want that kind of convenience, and the local outlets for local food are dropping. And then I suppose that's kind of also what Anrita was saying, is that these products can be more expensive, and we know that price is very important to consumers as well. That's kind of one of the main things that people think about when they're shopping for food very often, is the price of the food. So yeah, so just to kind of summarize there, I suppose, just a little bit of a brief overview of that. So basically the main message of this was that supporting obviously your local organic farmers and fishermen results in kind of you eating healthier, fresher, seasonal organic food, and therefore that can cause a massive reduction in food waste and environmental harm. Thank you. That's all from me. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be here for the panel now, and you can also drop me an email if you like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your really interesting presentation, and also for sharing these really like the figures, which I'm sure everybody kind of stood when you see how many ways there is. But we will come back with the questions for you later on, then, as you said, in interactive Q&A session. Now I would like to use this opportunity as well to introduce you our fourth speaker in the panel, in the last segment of the panel discussion. I hope he is here with us. Professor Pier Giuseppe Morone. Okay, I can see you. Perfect.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Just that I briefly introduce you. So Professor Pier Giuseppe Morone is a full professor of economic policy at Unitelma Sapienza, University of Rome. He holds master degree in development economics and a PhD from Science and Technology Policy Research at Sussex University. His research focuses on green innovation, circular bioeconomy, sustainable transition, with a numerous publication in the prestige journals. Professor Morone coordinates the Bioeconomy in Transition Research Group and serves as a director of the School of Sustainability Studies and the Circular Economy. Dear Professor Pier Giuseppe, I have a few questions for you. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest barrier to consumer adoption of the bio-based products?
Okay, so thank you very much, Dragika, for inviting me today and for organizing this interesting webinar. Yes, I mean, there are lots of studies going on in the bioeconomy transition in order to address this question that you're posing today to me. There are several barriers, of course, that have been identified in the literature. Some of them have to do with, are related to the price of products. Other barriers are, of course, related to the availability of the products that we're talking about, or the functionality of the products that are meant to replace conventional products. So bio-based, the functionality of bio-based products that have to replace conventional products. And other are related to the information available around these bio-based products. So let's start from the price issue. I mean, as it always happens when there are new products entering into the market that are produced in a different way, using different inputs with different technologies, which are oftentimes, as this is the case for bio-based products, less mature than conventional technology used for using conventional products. And the price is an issue. We have to come to the understanding that we have been using the oil as a feedstock for the last 50 years and more. And of course, the technologies that have been developed in order to use this feedstock are very much mature. So which means that basically the production costs are much lower than production costs associated with new technologies. So this is one big issue. The other issue is that oftentimes when we compare conventional products with bio-based products, sustainable bio-based products, by definition, sustainable bio-based products are sustainable from an economic point of view, from an environmental point of view, and from a social point of view, which basically means that these are products whose price should reflect what we in economics call externalities, both environmental externalities and social externalities, which is not the case for conventional products. Conventional products are much can enjoy much lower prices because they are simply not incorporating environmental or social externalities in their prices. If I'm producing a conventional plastic bottle using underpaid labor force from the south of the world, from the global south, and using a feedstock which is impacting heavily on the environment because of CO2 emissions or other kind of pollutants used and emitted in the environment, introduced in the environment during the production. And I'm not taking into consideration these as extra costs. These are external costs, social costs that are not reflected in the price. Then of course this is an unsustainable product that can enter the market at a very low price. But still, this is not sustainable. When we talk about bio-based products, we want to make bio-based products that are produced in a sustainable way, which basically means that their impact on the environment is reduced to a minimum. And if there are such impacts, they are reflected in the price. And also we want to produce in a way that is socially sustainable. The social pillar of sustainability is also very relevant here in this transition. Therefore, this is going to have an impact on prices. So we have to come to an understanding that it's probably going to take a very long time for all these reasons that I've been discussing and mentioning. It's going to take time for bio-based product to be competitive price-wise with conventional product. And this is where the consumer's behavior comes into the picture. I didn't have the opportunity to attend to the whole first part of this webinar, but I'm sure that Anarita has been discussing these consumers' behavior aspects. So consumers have to understand that to adapt their behavior, modify their behavior, and the policy can play a key role, a central role in this, understanding that although they can pay higher prices in the short term, in the long term, the benefits that as a collective, as a society we will get by buying sustainable products are going to be way higher than buying cheaper price which are unsustainable. So this is where production and consumption should really go hands in hands. If you want, I can keep on exploring this question, but let me know how much time we have.
Yeah, maybe we can go also on another one, which really kind of touch base the first one question. You actually already kind of touched this topic of affordability. So I'm just wondering, can you maybe give some kind of advice on how we could balance affordability and sustainability to encourage more widespread consumer participation?
Yeah. Okay, so by increasing the production volume of bio-based products, this is going to impact positively on technological development. And as we keep producing in a different way new products, then we will specialize, will become more efficient in the production, and therefore we will prices will be reduced. Okay, so this is going to be something that will be achieved as the bioeconomy starts replacing massively the conventional fossil-based and linear production system. But on the other hand, there are also other relevant actions that can be taken in the transition phase. For example, there is the whole debate about sustainability standards, defining serious and reliable and scientifically sound criteria and indicators for assessing sustainability, and defining, as a consequence of standards and criteria, defining green labels, which are reliable for consumers. So green labels can play a key role in the transition phase. Why? Because they are basically a tool for reducing the information asymmetry that there is from producer and consumers, an asymmetry problem that is very, very relevant when it comes to environmental issues. So if we succeed in measuring sustainability, in assessing sustainability in a reliable and scientifically sound way, and we produce green labels which are trusted by consumers, then we are providing a lot of valuable information to consumers for them to make informed choices and for them to choose what is more sustainable, what is really more sustainable. So this is also opening up to the whole question and the whole issue about greenwashing. Greenwashing is really a major problem when it comes to the transition. Why? Because of course companies have understood that consumers do have preferences for sustainable products, and therefore they make claims which sometimes are not proved to be right, to be true. So this is what we call greenwashing, which can represent a major obstacle for the transition. Why? Because this is reducing the trust of consumers in the production of sustainable products. And we did a study in which we investigated what was the impact of providing unreliable information about sustainability content of a product. And this is a study that actually conducted with Anita. And what we learned was that actually consumers, when they incur repeatedly in wrong information, misleading information about the sustainability, they will switch their behavior from sustainable back to conventional products in an irreversible way. So they lose completely their trust and they will switch back to conventional unsustainable products just because they don't trust anymore companies that are claiming to be sustainable. So basically, the damage that can be done by using this practice of greenwashing is really a major one, because it can have long-term effects on consumers' behavior.
Thank you so much. Really interesting what you shared with us, and I would agree on that issue with greenwashing. And now maybe just the last question for you is that what role do business and the policymakers can play in making sustainable consumer choices easier?
Okay, so this question relates to what I've been mentioning before about, for example, sustainability standards. So policymakers can indeed promote the development of these standards for bio-based products, for circularity measures, and so on. Can control and make sure that these are as reliable as possible. But then at the same time, they should really put an effort, an extra effort in creating a level playing field between sustainable bio-based products, circular products, and conventional products. Why? Because of course there's the price issue. There is the price issue that we've been mentioning before. So we really need to make a level playing field for conventional products and new based, more sustainable products. So policymakers can play a central role. How? They can do with soft power or with regulation. Regulation can be very relevant in highly polluting sectors, or soft power through nudging can be very relevant to stimulate at the same time consumers' behavior while incentivizing new production models that are more sustainable. So this is really a policy mix that we need here. Both from the production side, consumption side, stimulating more sustainable production models, and at the same time nudging consumers towards more sustainable consumption habits. Okay, so this is really a key role that the policymaker can play in this transition. For example, the European Union is adopting this CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a very relevant one, a very important one for going in the direction of decarbonizing and for making a level playing field from what we produce within the European boundaries and what we import from other countries. But this is also posing another problem, the problem of just transition and making sure that no one is left behind. So there are two issues here about, and two roles, two possible roles for the policymaker. So we want to accelerate the transition, but we want to make sure that, for example, people that are working in a highly polluting sector do not become, do not suffer from job displacement. So we want to, at the same time, while for example, subsidizing less polluting production systems, we want to invest money in order to retrain the labor force in order to be absorbed in this changing labor market. Because we don't really, what we really should avoid is to have a transition that creates, that increases the inequality issue that has characterized the final century, the last part of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. So we really want to make this transition as just as possible, not leaving no one behind. So this applies both within countries, for example, within European boundaries. We want to make sure that people that are working in a highly polluting sector are not left behind and they are retrained in order to be reintroduced effectively in new sectors. But this is also an issue, as I was mentioning before with the CBAM example, is also an issue at global level, because we really don't want to make the transition for Europe, or for European countries, for European citizens, without taking care of what is going on in the global south. So if we impose tariffs for those goods that are produced using lower standards in terms of environmental impact in the global south, at the same time we should make sure that we incentivize a production shift in the global south for them not to be left behind and for them not to be, how can I say, not to suffer all the negative consequences of this transition. So it's really something that should be done, making sure that it's done in the most possible equal way, both within countries, within Europe, but also within the United States, but also at a global scale. Okay. As I say, no one is going to win this playing on his own. Okay, this is a battle that we have to fight all together as humankind at planetary level.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of these insights. I'm really impressed with your answers. So thank you so much, Professor Pier Giuseppe, for your time and for joining us now. I really appreciate that. Now let's dive into our last segment of today's webinar. That's interactive Q&A session. I would like to ask you, Anna Rita and Jenny, if you can turn your cameras and mics on. I will have one question for each of you, if you don't mind. So maybe let's start with you, Anna Rita. Would you mind to tell me if you know that thing is how the regional and cultural differences in Europe influence consumer perspectives on bio-based products?
Okay, thank you for this interesting question. We collected data for different studies, for several studies across European countries, but sometimes we focus especially on southern countries. So usually we did not find significant differences in many aspects. Let's say the willingness to buy bio-based products or the willingness to pay for this kind of products. We also investigate what we call the pro-environmental attitude, meaning also the behavior, but also the attitude toward some specific aspects, especially related to the environment. And also in that case, we did not find significant differences. But in my opinion, if we consider a wider range of countries, also in Europe, for example, the northern countries, I believe that the social norms could play a key role, meaning that we found, as I showed before for the energy community, that the environmental concerns and the pro-environmental attitude play a significant role. So social norms, meaning that the norms that we are let's say, following without any specific sanction or rewarding to follow these norms could could improve our pro-environmental behavior and also change our pro-environmental attitude. So in my opinion, this is one of the points that we need to take into account to explain different regional let's say, behaviors or willingness to buy such products.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna Rita, for your answer. And now let's go to Jennifer. Jenny, I'm just wondering if you can maybe tell us how do you see or look to make the impact on the food waste reduction through your FRED projects, but also on the another projects on which you are working on? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So yeah, the FRED project is all around resource efficiency when it comes to food systems. So we're basically trying to help those kinds of decisions. So if, for example, in government, they wanted to make a decision to make the food system more sustainable, which interventions, which solutions are they going to take on board and why? Or is it a combination of solutions, for example? So we're looking at all the interventions that exist out there. We've actually done like a whole literature search. We've done massive stakeholder engagement, consumer surveys, speaking to people across the entire food supply chain to get their inputs on what their challenges are within the food system to do with food waste or just with the food system in general. Because obviously we can't deal with food waste on its own, but we need to see, we can't just come up with a solution that tackles food waste, but it doesn't actually work for, a healthy, sustainable food system as well. So we've been doing all of that, and we're trying to now match these interventions and these solutions with the needs of all the stakeholders. We'll go through kind of impact assessments of all of those interventions as well, or the top interventions, I suppose, that meet the needs of everyone in the supply chain and consumers, and then put those back to the policymakers, and also, I suppose, do some feasibility and acceptability for those as well. So it's also like working directly with policymakers, even as we've been discussing, kind of people having a motivation to, change their behavior doesn't necessarily result in a change in behavior. So, policy is often very much necessary until kind of it becomes habit for people after that. So yeah, it's about kind of that we're, I suppose, working with the policymakers to see what kind of approaches they can have to facilitate this change.
Great. Thank you so much for your answer as well. Thank you also for joining all of you today with us. So as we wrap up now with this final webinar, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of our speakers who share their knowledge and expertise with us. Also, I would like to thank you, all of you participants, for your engagement and participation during our webinar series. As I mentioned, even in the round 1 and now in the round 2. What I would like to also share with you that it was over last 8 months, we had really a strong attendance, and it's really fantastic to see that this level of interest and support was continued. So once again, thank you all for that. And also I would like to tell you that this has been really meaningful journey for me personally, and I truly hope you had found the value in what we have achieved in our campaign. And I hope we will, still working together towards a more, sustainable and bio-based future for everybody. So thank you so much for today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to maybe see you in another campaigns. So thank you once again. Enjoying the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.